Bitcoin Season 2 is brought to you by Arch Network, the protocol building bridgeless apps on Bitcoin. More on Arch later in the show. Let's kick it off. Welcome back to Bitcoin Season 2. I have Seth for Privacy here, privacy advocate and VP at Cake Wallet. Seth, thank you so much for coming on Bitcoin Season 2.
Yeah, man. Thank you so much for having me. You've been doing some fantastic work, and it seems like a really good fit. So I'm excited to jump into some important topics today, and also just get to chat a little bit with you. I know we've crossed paths a lot on social media, and Telegram, and other places, but yet another one of those kind of like Bitcoiner friendships where I've never actually got to talk face to face. This will be fun.
Yeah. And we'll talk about a number of things. There's a lot of drama in the Bitcoin ecosystem today, but we're going to sideline that for now. Let's just go to like, I feel like the beating heart of what your like talking points, the things you really like to promote are, which is privacy and autonomy, which leads us to the news of the week, really, which is the latest update in the Samourai wallet case. But because I haven't covered it very much on Bitcoin Season 2, I'm going to invite you to try to kind of explain the past year to the listener. What is Samourai Wallet? What happened? And where is the case currently today? Maybe this could take a few minutes, but I'm just going to let you go and give the listener a breakdown.
Yeah, I'll try to keep it as brief as I can without leaving out any important details. But it is absolutely wild that it's been a year now. I believe they were indicted on April 24th of 2024. And that was a wild day in the space and a wild week in the space. But to step back a little further, even before that, so for those who don't know what Samourai Wallet was, as it was a popular privacy wallet, but compared to a lot of the other wallets was relatively small. So maybe if you're a newer Bitcoiner or have never had a specific privacy bent, maybe you never actually used it. But what Samourai Wallet was it was an Android-only Bitcoin wallet that focused heavily on transactional privacy. So on-chain privacy. It was not Lightning wallet at all, but tried to make it as easy as possible to gain privacy on-chain in Bitcoin. It did this in a number of ways. The primary way that people would think of, and the primary thing that's basically under attack in the court case that's going on right now, is their whirlpool functionality, which what that was basically a way to gain forward-looking privacy for your Bitcoin coins, your UTXOs. And it was using what's called CoinJoin, which is something I'm sure y'all talked about a little bit on the show before. But basically, you could work together with other Bitcoiners to create a transaction where you all spent your money back to yourself, but in a way that actually made it so no outside observer could know which input matches which output at the end of the day. So it provided really good privacy where from that point on, no one could know which of those coins was connected to the history of which the inputs, it breaks the biggest issue with Bitcoin privacy, which is that for most payments that you make, you're revealing the history of all of the inputs of that transaction from inception, most likely. A lot of times there's nothing really breaking that link anytime in its history. So you're revealing a lot of information about yourself when you spend. So Whirlpool was the primary privacy feature that they offered. But they also had a set of what they called post-mix tools, or basically spending privacy tools. So when you actually went to make a transaction, Samourai Wallet could essentially fake a two-party coin join. So they could fake a Payjoin and make it look like there were multiple parties collaborating to build a transaction, but it was actually just your own inputs. You could do Payjoin transactions. Payjoin V2 is what they supported back then. With other Samourai Wallet users and coordinate with them over Tor to actually make those payments, amongst other features that they had. But that was really the core of what they were offering. And the really, really important thing to understand is that Samourai Wallet was a self-custodial wallet. They never had the ability to take custody of users' funds. Whirlpool and CoinJoin in general does not ever give up custody of funds or give any other entity the ability to spend your funds. And that was very important, not only for Samourai Wallet from an ethos standpoint, because they were very much hardcore on self-custody, hardcore on privacy, hardcore on using Bitcoin as actual freedom money. But it was also really, really important because the crux of the potential issue for a privacy tool or a wallet provider in Bitcoin relied on self-custody. All of the regulation, all of the guidance that we had up until that point, the point that they were indicted, was from FinCEN, from other regulatory bodies, basically saying, if you don't take custody of funds, you don't need to register as a money service business, you don't need to register as a money transmitter, you're fine because you're not actually the one making the transaction for people. And that was the broad interpretation. That was pretty much what everybody thought was the truth, because that's what FinCEN had said was the kind of the bar. If you were above that bar, if you were taking custody of funds, you were obviously liable for what happened with those funds. And if you stayed under that bar, you were generally safe from any kind of regulatory attack or prosecution. But that all changed on April 24th, 2024, because in 1 week, we had an update in the Tornado Cash case, which I'll leave the specifics of that aside, but essentially it's a very similar case that actually in some ways is even more egregious because of the way that Tornado Cash worked. It was more decentralized than Samourai Wallet was, even though it also was self-custodial. We had an update on that where the government basically said it doesn't matter what happens with your tool after you release it. If you released a tool that works well and protects people's privacy, but someone uses it for something evil down the road, even if you have no ability to stop it, you are liable for that. And then Samourai Wallet was indicted. They were arrested on account of conspiracy to commit money laundering and conspiracy to operate an unlicensed money transmitting service. And this went totally against all of the guidance that we had. This went totally against everything that we knew was okay and not okay according to the US government when it comes to Bitcoin tools. And so that was a huge, huge moment there. And I'll pause in case you have any other questions or thoughts you want to throw in, and then I can do a little case update.
Yeah, I think, it might be also important to say, to specify that they were indicted by a specific jurisdiction in the United States, right? And I'm not as familiar with this because I don't pay as much attention to this, but they were indicted in the state of New York, right? Mm-hmm. And this comes into play, and I think this may, because I'm not super familiar with how all these things work, but like it's very dependent. A lot of the beats and important like details of this are like relating to where they were indicted, the jurisdiction, and how that's being enforced. And then that gets into some of the latest updates. I'll just throw it back at you. I don't have any further questions. Keep going. Keep unraveling this for the listener.
No, it's a good note. Yeah, I mean they were indicted in the Southern District of New York, the SDNY, which, if you follow any cases around this, if you followed a lot of the cases around Bitcoin in the past, they're almost always happening in the SDNY. And this is one of the worst places to be a defendant. I think, and don't quote me, but I think last time I heard, there's like a 98% conviction rate in SDNY. It's extremely prosecution friendly. It's extremely government friendly, and a very bad place to be a defendant against government indictment. And this indictment was brought specifically by the U.S. Department of Justice against the Samourai Wallet developers in the Southern District of New York. The specifics of how they're actually able to indict them in a place where no one lived and the company didn't operate escape me. I've heard some good lawyers on it chime in, but somehow they're able to pull them into the Southern District of New York, which is friendly for them as prosecutors, even though the defendants, one was in Pennsylvania, one was in Portugal. Their business was not operated out of New York. But there's some intricacies with how, if a law enforcement individual uses the tool in the Southern District of New York, they can then pull the case.
Because somebody in that jurisdiction used the tool and was like, okay, I was here when I used it. We're going to try him in this. Already broken. Very, very loose association.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely not best case scenario, and very important for the prosecution, I think, because one of the key things here is it seems very clear that they're trying to set precedent through prosecution rather than through legislation. There's no law that has changed. There's no regulation that has changed. There's no statement from FinCEN that has changed. Essentially, they're trying to raise the bar by prosecuting people for breaking something that they were understood to not be breaking, which is the biggest shift here. And as far as the case goes so far, there haven't been a lot of major updates or changes until this last week. So things move really slow in the U.S. court system. It's essentially just been like pretrial hearings, bail being set. One of the developers was released under house arrest in Pennsylvania, and then the other was also released on essentially not parole, but the pre-hearing version of that. But the big bombshell dropped this last week, where the defense uncovered that the prosecution had actually reached out to FinCEN, who are the regulatory body that had created this guidance that we were all going by, that Samourai Wallet were going by. They were doing their best to be above and beyond the letter of the law. They reached out to FinCEN and said, hey, we want to try these guys. Can you tell us more? Like, they're breaking this. Is this going to be a clear win in court? And essentially, FinCEN said, well, since they're not taking custody, we wouldn't classify them as a money services business. So you're going to have a hard time in court. And the prosecution heard that 6 months before they indicted the Samourai Wallet developers, continued to prosecute them, to indict them, to throw them in jail, to put them through this whole scenario, this craziness. And at the same time, they hid this information from the defense, which, again, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not going to get into too much of the details of how it actually works, but there's something called a Brady disclosure where they were supposed to reveal this information as soon as possible to the defense so that the defense can use this, obviously, to help them in their case. It's a good part of the U.S. legal system that protects defenses from prosecution having important details and just dropping them like bombs in the trial itself. So they were supposed to disclose this. They did not. And the defense thankfully uncovered this. There's been back and forth over the past couple of days over what actually will happen here. The prosecution basically said, yeah, we disclosed how we were supposed to. We didn't do anything wrong here. And the defense just replied, like maybe an hour ago it went live. They just replied and explained how blatant of a miscarriage of justice this is if they're able to get away with not only indicting them while knowing that the regulatory body that supposedly is the one saying they can't do what they did said, hey, we don't think that they're actually guilty of this. But they also withheld that, so the defense couldn't use that in pretrial hearings. They couldn't hear that in the hearings where bond was set, where the decisions on custody were set. They couldn't use that in any of those situations, even though they were supposed to have had that disclosed ahead of time. So hopefully this will be a bombshell that opens things up for the defense and maybe gets the case dropped. But we're still kind of waiting to see what actually happens.
So pulling back bigger than just this specific case, like, regardless of the outcome of this specific case, do you feel that there is a moment happening for privacy in the Western world here? Or is this just another chapter in this ongoing battle? I look and I think back to the war on encryption in the 90s, and that was like very much a moment in privacy tech, cryptography, and encryption. And we haven't really seen since then, I would say. There was the advent of Bitcoin, and that kicked off the ability to be a little more private with these new privacy technologies. But we haven't really seen like another stress or tension, one of these like moments where it can go a number of ways. Do you think that's happening right now? And do you think the Samourai case and Tornado Cash case, do you think they're related to it? What's your take on this thought I'm throwing out here?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're hitting it head on. I think really this is the freedom money, the cryptocurrency version of the crypto wars, very much so. Because, I mean, cryptography as a whole is what made any of this possible. It's what made any of our good, useful privacy tools possible. So that was necessarily going to be a fight. And thankfully that fight ended quite well. Essentially, the precedent was set that code is free speech. It should be well protected under the U.S.'s First Amendment. It should be something that we should be able to publish and not face repercussions of how that code is used. Thankfully, that set a very good precedent. But we're in a bit of a weird spot here with cryptocurrency, like Bitcoin specifically, Ethereum in the case of Tornado Cash, where code is still being published, but it's very different than a piece of software someone can run, because that code is actually a network that can be used for a lot of different things. It's decentralized in its very nature, especially on the Tornado Cash side, whereas on the Samourai Wallet side, it is code being published, but there is this third party that's profiting off the use of a privacy tool. So there's a lot of kind of the edges of the precedent that was set in the crypto wars is being stressed here. And what we saw from the last administration in the US is that they did not like that stress, and they wanted to make sure that they could clearly define what you can do with Bitcoin, what you can do as a company that builds around Bitcoin. They wanted to drastically limit that. Thankfully, that has eased off under the current administration in the US, but the U.S. is not a dictatorship as much as people think it is, especially when there's big personalities in office. And despite Trump and a lot of the people behind him essentially telling the DOJ to drop all these cases, to drop the litigation against cryptocurrency projects like Samourai Wallet. They weren't specifically named, but essentially they were told, just stop all this. This is ridiculous. The DOJ said, nope, we're not going to stop. And that was the other big thing that happened in the Samourai Wallet case, is they had until last Friday to decide if they were going to drop the trial or drop the charges entirely because of that memo that had been sent out. And they just basically said, no, there's no way we're going to drop it because of that. So I definitely think we're at that next pivotal moment, which is, okay, cryptography, we had to allow that. We lost the crypto wars as the US government speaking. We lost the crypto wars. Now there's cryptocurrency, which is leveraging cryptography to actually make better money, to actually give people freedom of choice in how they store wealth, how they spend, and allowing them to actually gain financial privacy, which is something that the government has been pushing back on for years and years. And so necessarily there was going to be a point at which there was going to be another battle. And I really do think that the Samourai Wallet and Tornado Cash cases, those are that next battle. If those cases are lost, then we will have a very, very bad precedent set for the vast majority of things you like to do in Bitcoin. It's not just going to be privacy tools. You could easily see the Samourai Wallet precedent expanding to Lightning node operators, to Lightning service providers, to Bitcoin node operators. There's a lot of lines that would immediately be very blurry, and next steps for legislation via prosecution to take place. So it's definitely, I think, the next kind of moment in the crypto wars. Different, but very, very, very important.
Let me tell you about one of the most slept on opportunities in crypto. Arch is building fast, composable DeFi apps on Bitcoin. Arch apps tap into the OG blockchain with by far the most liquidity and best brand in crypto. I've known the team for over a year. The tech they're building is solid, and they are racing towards mainnet. There's dexes like Saturn, meme coins on funkybit.fun, instant loans on Cha-Ching, and so much more. Plus, they're rewarding testnet users, so join me in trying out Arch while it's still early. So let's talk about Bitcoin itself and privacy on Bitcoin. This is, I feel, one of the most under-discussed topics in Bitcoin culture these days. It used to be like one of the strongest cultures in Bitcoin. A lot of that went to other privacy enabling tech, Ethereum, Monero. You're a huge fan of Monero. And in this like modern era of Bitcoin, like the dominant cultures are more ETF related or macro guys or ordinals enjoyers, like, you know, and that's fine, but it's like where all the privacy people go. So I want to get your thoughts on the current state of Bitcoin privacy. First of all, I guess my first question is, do you believe that Bitcoin offers sufficient privacy to users today? You can be very honest.
Yeah, I mean, no. I think the answer is unfortunately a very firm no, in that Bitcoin's privacy today is quite poor for the average individual, because the actual tooling around gaining privacy on Bitcoin is very, very difficult. This was still true when Samourai Wallet was around, but at least we had some good tooling in place to be able to gain privacy if you're willing to jump through a lot of hoops. Like, it was not easy to use Samourai Wallet. That's not anything against them, but that's rather the difficulties that are imposed by Bitcoin itself being transparent by design. And any privacy tool that you try to use on top of Bitcoin is essentially fighting the very nature of Bitcoin. And so it was always difficult, but it was achievable. With Samourai Wallet shut down, with Whirlpool no longer being accessible, there was a lot of uncertainty around some Lightning wallets as well, being available in the US, which thankfully has shifted, and like Phoenix Wallet are back. But also the only other CoinJoin company that existed, Wasabi Wallet, they shut down operations. You can still use Wasabi Wallet with some coordinators that other people run, but there's a lot of downsides to that. And yeah, right now it's basically on-chain privacy is nearly impossible to achieve what I would call good enough privacy. You can achieve some privacy. Things like silent payments help a lot on the receive side. So especially if you're like trying to receive donations or regular payments.
What is a silent payment for the user or for the listener? Because I think this is one of the few like interesting privacy things in Bitcoin as of late.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So silent payments are really the best way to think about them is they are a better address type for Bitcoin that also provides better privacy. It's not really a privacy tool in and of itself, but what silent payments does is it gives you one single static address that you can reuse. You can send to anybody, you can post on your Twitter profile, use it wherever you want. And when someone actually pays you to that address, they use 2 public keys that are in that address to generate a unique on-chain address for you that no one else can see. They can't see any other addresses that have been generated with that silent payment address. It basically just makes address reuse impossible and sharing an address much simpler, because no longer do you have to worry about not reusing an address. No longer do you have to worry about like making sure that you rotate every time, or did I use this one or did I not? Oh, I posted this one on social, so I should be really careful with how I use the coins associated with that. That's a thing of the past with silent payments. Unfortunately, silent payments adoption is pretty small right now. Cake Wallet led the way with silent payments. They've done fantastic work on that before I joined, but we've been working really hard on some improvements on that hopefully will be out within the next month or so. But outside of that, there's not many options for using silent payments. We're working really hard to get other wallets to adopt it. I have a website, silentpayments.xyz, that has a lot of info on how people can start to use it as wallet developers. If you're a wallet dev and you're listening, especially just sending support is a huge win. But silent payments is one piece of that, where it does help on the receive privacy side, but it's not foolproof. Like if I post a silent payment address and I get a bunch of donations and someone wants to see what I'm going to do with those funds, they can send me a donation. That output that they send to me, when I go to spend, maybe I just combine all the donations I've received and send them to an exchange or something. They'll see all the other inputs that I've received over the lifespan of that silent payment address or all the other coins that were on my wallet. And I can reveal a lot of information about myself that way. So it doesn't solve everything. And that's where like it would be really good to have something like Whirlpool back, to have something like CoinJoin that's more accessible. We don't really have that right now. The other main piece that's starting to come to the forefront and starting to get adoption is Payjoin V2. So I briefly mentioned that Samourai Wallet had Payjoin V1 in it, which was essentially a way that you can work with one other person to create a transaction that doesn't look like a CoinJoin. It just looks like someone spending Bitcoin to someone else. It looks like a very standard transaction. That worked well enough, but there were some major downsides with Payjoin V1 that Dan Gould and others have worked on to improve.
Love
Payjoin
Dan
V2.
Gould. Dan's a cool guy. I like him. Yeah.
Absolute legend. Absolute legend. One of the nicest guys you'll meet. But he's done fantastic work on coming up with Payjoin V2, which essentially changes it from being where you have to be connected to the other person the whole time to make this transaction, to letting you use a server to coordinate between the two of you, but in a way that doesn't reveal anything about you to that server. So it's very privacy preserving, but it's much, much more user friendly than Payjoin V1 was. And it's a really important tool just for when you're spending Bitcoin. This should really become the norm, is when you're sending someone money. Hopefully their wallet will support Payjoin V2 and you'll be able to just send money. You won't think about it. It's not like CoinJoin where you have to sit there and wait for a round or go through some complex process or run your own node. You don't need anything like that. You just need 2 wallets that support it and you can use it right away. Bull Bitcoin released initial support. It's very early, I would say pretty alpha support in their wallet right now, but I know they're working to improve that and expand its usage in Bull Bitcoin, and they're going to use it for their exchange as well, so that when you make withdrawals from Bull Bitcoin, you'll use Payjoin transactions to both save on fees and gain better privacy. And then at Cake Wallet, we actually just finished up building it and should have a release out this week with Payjoin V2 support to all of our users. So that'll be another huge win. And that's one of those tools where, like, the goal of privacy tooling to me should be you don't think about it, you use it, and you gain privacy as a result. It's not something you're like consciously going, I'm going to use more privacy here, but it needs to become the default. It needs to become the norm. And so that's what we're aiming towards. Initially, it won't be enabled for everyone by default in Cake Wallet, as we just make sure that everything is really set in stone. I mean, this is very early for Payjoin. The actual BIP was just merged in. We've been working with Dan Gould on the actual libraries around it. But I think we're in a really good state. And soon, my goal is in Cake Wallet, every Bitcoin wallet will have Payjoin V2 enabled by default. And so if they're paying someone else in Cake Wallet or receiving funds from somebody else in Cake Wallet, it'll be a Payjoin. They won't think about it. Nothing extra is needed. And they'll gain some good on-chain privacy from that. Again, it's not a silver bullet. It doesn't fix everything, but it's like another piece in the puzzle that helps us to achieve better privacy on Bitcoin and continue to make it harder and harder for chain surveillance companies to surveil us.
Do you think we are reaching the limits of what is technically possible to do for to be private with Bitcoin, given Bitcoin's current design and limitations? This is leading us into a soft fork, the topic of soft forks. But given what we know about how Bitcoin operates today, do you think we are reaching the limit of what is technically possible?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely are. I think we have already reached that limit years ago, honestly. I think proof of that is the fact that Samourai Wallet as an entity did the best possible from a legal perspective, but because there's still a central entity that has to run this separate service, it's not still
people. It's ultimately people having to do it. Like, it's not something that can be abstracted or executed by the network. It has to be, people have to flip the switches.
Exactly. Yeah. The fact that it has to happen at the app level and not at the consensus level, it's not something core to Bitcoin, makes it just far more vulnerable. It reduces the resiliency of the privacy tooling we can build around Bitcoin, which is vital. The proof is in Samourai Wallet. Like, we had a fantastic privacy tool. It got shut down overnight by a government because it's at app level. It's a company had to run it to make it happen. And there are ways to decentralize that. There's ways to have other people run coordinators, but there are major downsides to using a coordinator you don't trust. And so there's a massive incentive and a lot of benefits from using a centralized coordinator that you trust. And even with like Samourai Wallet's decentralized coordinator that they were working on, it would still be a central liquidity pool that they control. Even if anyone can run a coordinator, it's basically just like a proxy into the coordination network. That's a whole sidebar. But I mean, that point was reached when there was no real improvement made to privacy on chain in Bitcoin, with Taproot kind of being talked about like it was going to be a privacy upgrade, but very much overstated in what it could actually achieve. It does have some good benefits for very specific use cases, but very much overstated by influencers on Twitter, which I remember well as being the solution to all the privacy
I bought
things.
it too. Like, at the time, I mean, Taproot is very arcane, very obscure, difficult to understand. And so I would just be like, oh yeah, my favorite podcast people say this. Sure. That sounds right. Which we'll get into the landscape of podcasters as we now, two guys who both run podcasts, get to reflect on. But here we are, and I cover a lot of discussion on soft forks and specific opcode proposals, BIPs on this podcast. What are the most promising near-term soft fork changes to Bitcoin, which you think would enhance users' privacy?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. I'm sure you've had much smarter people than me on to describe what these proposals are, so I won't dive into what they are specifically that much. But I think the biggest one to me it seems like the only one that actually has a shot. And honestly, in the wake of this op return stuff, I'm kind of doubtful that anything has a shot. And I know you've already talked about that a bit on the show, so we need to wade too much into the op return drama. But to me, the only real proposal that has muscle right now is op CTV, check template verify, and op CSFS, check sig from stack.
Yep.
I get that one right. And ultimately, all that is a way to do pre-signed transactions in a much simpler way. It's nothing crazy. It's not OpCap that allows you to do some wild and inefficient things, but basically to do whatever you want on Bitcoin, but in a really hacky way. It's very simple, very minimal, very focused on allowing us to improve tooling that we already have. It brings a lot of improvements to Lightning to make it much easier to use and maintain a Lightning node and Lightning channels. It brings a lot of improvements to Arc, making it far more user-friendly. Like, just as an aside, Arc is something that I absolutely love as a concept, and it's something that at Cake Wallet we've been exploring, trying to be maybe one of the first to actually implement it. But there are a lot of problems with the way that Arc works right now, especially for mobile wallets. Because of the way that you have to be able to refresh VTXOs regularly, you need to be able to make sure to do a lot of things in the background that platforms like iOS specifically don't allow you to do predictably. There's a lot of potential user experience problems with them that would be solved, and we know that they would be solved with CTV plus CSFS, and would make that much more achievable. Now, none of these things are explicitly privacy upgrades, and I would be hesitant to say that like CTV plus CSFS is this massive privacy improvement, but it does improve privacy by improving the tooling that we have available to us. So like Arc isn't actually fantastic for privacy. Everything that you do within an Arc is visible to the operator. And when you make a payment, you reveal a lot of the history of those transfer VTXOs to the person that you're paying. So you shouldn't view like it as a privacy tool, but the fact that you can more easily onboard directly into something without having to link your identity or without having to use an exchange, and that you can use Lightning much more easily, where Lightning does have some really good privacy benefits. Those two things do go a long ways to improving the user privacy of the average individual, like someone who doesn't go above and beyond, but is just using a wallet. They can have much better privacy because they have much easier access to Lightning and a much more dependable Lightning experience. There are some ways that you could leverage it to create something like a payment pool, which is essentially where multiple users share a UTXO, and it's a scary phrase for people, but essentially in a trustless way, you're able to share a UTXO between many people, 20, 50, 100 people, and make payments into and out of it. And you can do this in a trustless way where you're not actually revealing which entity within that payment pool is actually the one receiving or making payments. So you do have to keep that data off chain. So like the other people in the payment pool know some of the information, but it gives much better on-chain privacy because outside observers would just see a single UTXO being spent from or received to, and it could look like a single entity when it's actually a payment pool. And you don't know who those payment pool participants are. So there are some ways that can provide privacy. It's not a direct, like, I don't want to make the Taproot promises of like, this fixes all the privacy issues with Bitcoin, but it does improve a lot of the tooling that we already have. It makes Lightning much more easily accessible, which is a huge win for privacy because Lightning does have good privacy assurances, and seems the most likely one to me right now. Now, I say that I have no clue if anything will get in, and I'm a little bit pessimistic right now, but we'll see. We'll see.
I feel you when you say that you're often pessimistic. I think this is the classic, idealist challenge, which is, we're idealistic. We want these things. We advocate for these things. We devote our lives towards the promotion of these things, in your case, privacy. And when we are disappointed by Bitcoin and the Bitcoin ecosystems like a perceived lack of urgency or unwillingness to prioritize those, I get that. So I want to invite you to be a little heterodox then. Bitcoin Season 2, we're allowed to talk about things that aren't Bitcoin. You've been a Monero guy.
This is legal?
Yeah, I know. We're breaking all the rules here. I mean, what do you think the future of on-chain privacy, notice I didn't say Bitcoin privacy, on-chain privacy can look like? And how do you, and it'd be great if Bitcoin fits into that, but if it doesn't, that's fine. What do you think the future of it looks like?
I mean, quite honestly, it looks like Monero. It looks like Zcash, if you want to use those as an example, but there's some issues with how Zcash approaches privacy, specifically that it's optional. But Monero, I think, is the leading example for a lot of reasons of what can be done with a Bitcoin-like ethos, but privacy as a central driver for development rather than just decentralization or just simplicity, making privacy a core aspect of that. And I say that because Monero carries over a lot of the things that we love about Bitcoin, but has kept this laser focus on privacy from the beginning. I mean, it was spawned out of CryptoNote, which is a separate protocol from Bitcoin. It's not a Bitcoin fork code or chain fork, which especially was rare in 2014. And it protects the receiver, the sender, and the amount in every transaction by default, which is like, it's really hard to overstate how amazing that is, that you don't have to do anything extra. Like, as someone who loves Bitcoin and has used every Bitcoin privacy tool under the sun, has talked with most of the developers of every Bitcoin privacy tool that has ever existed, like the tooling around Bitcoin, people have gotten very creative with how you can try to gain privacy on something that is transparent by design. But like we talked about, there are just major limitations to that. And when you're able to build from the ground up to be private by default, it provides just a much better user experience. Like the ability to just send a payment in Monero and know that you're going to gain this default privacy without any extra thing, without having to use a specific wallet or without having to use a specific app. It's really, really powerful. And I think it is a shining example. It's why Monero has taken over in places like darknet markets, which I'm not condoning what happens on darknet markets, but they're a very good litmus test for what technology actually works. Criminals are normally the first adopter of good tech, especially good privacy tech. And Monero has taken the darknet market world by storm because it's just very effective and very simple to use. And that's where I would like to see Bitcoin go. Like, something I say frequently is like, I would love for Monero to not need to exist. Like, if Bitcoin was private by default, or at least was easy to achieve privacy for the average individual, I would, like, who cares? I don't care about Monero in this ideologue sense. Like, I don't care about it as a token or as a tool on its own. I care that something like that is available to people. It would be best if it was Bitcoin, because Bitcoin has clearly a bigger network effect, has much more reach, has much easier access for people. But it doesn't exist right now. So that's why I do think Monero is still an invaluable tool for freedom at the moment. And for a lot of people, a lot of Bitcoin podcasters and influencers included, Monero is a tool for spending that they use frequently. And they're probably still saving their money in Bitcoin. Most are. I think there's reasons that maybe you could save in Monero too, but that's not something I focus on at all. But they're saving in Bitcoin and they're spending in Monero because it's just a fantastic pairing. And that symbiosis, that ability to move freely between cryptocurrencies, is a very underexplored aspect of crypto that makes it really, really powerful and makes them collectively much better for freedom than any of them could be on their own.
So to continue down the topics which frustrate us, the ones that make us very pessimistic, we'll wrap up with maybe some treatment on the topic du jour of the past couple of weeks, which is something we've covered a lot on this podcast already, but it is still the hot debate topic, and it's still every day I wake up and there's new things, new beats to the story, which is the op return drama. Mm-hmm. You've been in the arena on this one as well.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, unfortunately.
I waded in.
It snipes us, and we just can't help but chime in. You don't have to explain what that is. This is for the listener. Go back and listen to the previous 2 episodes, the previous Red Room with me and Colin, or where I interview Udi Wertimer on this. But I'll posit this question to you, Seth. If we're going to view like the op return debate at a meta level, to me it seems to reveal a lot of the kind of the quietly building camps in Bitcoin that were not super well revealed until recently. Has this drama and a lot of people's statements or positions on op return, has it changed the way you view Bitcoin discourse or certain Bitcoin talking heads or influence? Have your views on the Bitcoin ecosystem evolved at all in the past few weeks?
I mean, I think, and maybe this is the surprising answer, overall my answer is no. Like, the vast majority of the people that I've seen comment in ways that I think is intentionally or unintentionally misleading or disingenuous, I already knew were not they were not individuals that I respected personally. And many of them I'd already had very concerning conversations with in the past, both publicly and privately. So a lot of the specifically the big accounts and the big influencers and stuff that'll comment on this and said some things that are remarkably odd. We'll go with the nice term. Were not surprising at all to me. I think the thing that was surprising was that so many individual Bitcoiners, people who maybe don't have as big of a voice, just showed how quickly they'll fall in line with whoever their favorite podcaster or influencer is without actually doing any digging themselves. And we have this mantra in Bitcoin of don't trust, verify, but I unfortunately was reminded that the vast majority of people in Bitcoin still don't actually follow that mantra. There's no verification happening for them on what software they're run. There's no verification happening for them on what they should and should not believe that they read on social media. And for many, they offload, they trust some other individual to tell them what is truth, to tell them what is the right move, to tell them what is the next step for them in Bitcoin. And they've offloaded that part of their journey to someone else, which is a terrifying thing, because even if the person that you offload that to is someone immensely trustworthy, let's say Andreas Antonopoulos, that's your hero. He's my hero. He's one of the main reasons why I'm in the space at all and care about having these kinds of conversations. He is not perfect. And he also understandably stepped back from the space entirely years ago. So if you do offload all of your trust to some other entity, even if they are really, really good and they nail it 99% of the time, they're not always going to be around. What are you going to do when they decide to hang up their podcasting mic or whatever and stop talking about these things publicly? You're going to be stranded in a place where you haven't built in this discernment functionality in yourself to be able to find out what is truth, what is falsehoods. How do I actually figure out what the right thing in these scenarios is? And I think that was the most concerning part. It was a reminder that the vast majority of people in Bitcoin, to be fair, in the Bitcoin Twitter ecosystem, which is a tiny microcosm of actual Bitcoiners, but in that ecosystem, at least, many, many people are just willing to blindly believe and follow whatever someone else tells them, and they're not willing to do their own research or to exercise their discernment muscles and find the truth themselves, which is very concerning, because if every Bitcoiner or the majority of Bitcoiners do that, necessarily Bitcoin becomes a much more fragile ecosystem, because there's far less people actually taking the necessary actions to find out what makes sense, to actually verify code, to actually do reproducible builds of their favorite software, to actually make sure that the things they're running actually are trustworthy, to understand why they are updating or not updating their software. There's a lot of things that people are just blindly trusting on, and that's definitely a concerning outcome.
One of the best things Satoshi ever did was not become a podcaster and to leave the space entirely. All the time, I'm just reminded this every time I see human failings, my own, other people's, even people I trust. I'm just so glad Satoshi is not around, and we will have to figure this out live as we go. Seth, you have any final thoughts, or where should people go if they were intrigued by your thoughts here today? Where should they go to learn more about how you think about the world, Bitcoin, Monero, privacy?
Yeah, for sure. So the main social media platform I'm on, really the only one, is X, formerly called Twitter. And I'm just at Seth for privacy there. So I post a lot of my thoughts there, have a lot of my thoughts about the op return stuff recently as well. So that's probably the best place to keep up with me. I also have a blog, sethforprivacy.com, that I update intermittently. It has a lot of guides for self-hosting good tools and my thoughts on how I would start a privacy journey if I was starting from scratch that people have found useful. And then beyond that, I would say especially the privacy tools we talked about today, silent payments, Payjoin V2, others are interesting to you, go check out CakeWallet, cakewallet.com. We're really leaning hard into Bitcoin privacy and trying to do everything that we can to help improve that user experience, that process. So I'd love your feedback and thoughts on what we're doing there. And we should have a release, like I mentioned, with Payjoin V2 in it sometime this week. So it's a good time to download and try out CakeWallet and start to try to be on the cutting edge of Bitcoin privacy and do what you can to take back your on-chain privacy.
Great. Thank you so much, Seth, for coming on Bitcoin Season 2. I'm glad we got you, and I'm sure you will be back on here the next time something interesting happens, hopefully positive, in the news cycle of privacy and whatever. So again, thank you so much, and I'll see you later.
Thanks for having me, man.